up, everyone? This is your boy, Kenneth the K-Rock Klein, coming to you with our 30th episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Woohoo! Yay! We made it! We made it to 30! Yes, yes, yes! It's really nice to have everyone listening in, tuning in whenever you have the chance to either sit back and listen to me give out my thoughts on certain things, or maybe ramble about some situations that you might not understand. Sometimes people might be thinking, I wonder if K-Rock's audience is actually the voices inside his head. I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. Trying to be the best in the business. But folks, this is it. The 30th episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping. Hopefully we got ourselves a banger of an episode. And boy, oh boy, there's definitely a lot that's happening right now. The NFL season is upon us. Yes, the NFL is finally here, and I cannot wait for the season to get started. It starts on Thursday with the Chiefs hosting the Baltimore Ravens, but man, oh man, I cannot wait for how the rest of the season goes about. Can't wait for Sunday to see the Texans play. They're going to be hosting, well, actually, they're going on the road to take on the Indianapolis Colts. Should be a really good division game between two teams wanting to fight for the AFC South Division title. Might be a big, good start for the team that does win that game in particular. So we'll see how that plays out. But anyways, folks, I kind of want to give out my predictions on my thoughts on who I think is going to win each game in particular. But more importantly, I feel like I need to talk about, in my mind, the top 5 college football teams that as of right now are in some serious hot water. Yes. And I think you guys might have an idea as to which 5 I'm going to be bringing, or maybe a general feeling of which few of the teams I have in store to talk about that is currently in the hot water. Because as of right now, folks, some of my predictions have been kind of a little shady at best, if you will, or maybe have not quite lived up to the hype as of now. But hopefully things will turn around there. But these would be my top 5 teams in major hot water. I'll give out my predictions in just a moment. And folks, I got to tell you what, I'm still driving to be the best that I can be in this podcast. I'm still also hoping that my co-host Mark T. Robinson and I will be able to get back on the air with another episode of Two Pals on a Pod. Things have just been busy for the both of us as well, so hopefully we can get another podcast out there for you in the near future. But in the meantime, though, we're going to step aside real fast. This is Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock, episode number 30. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. It's now time for my top 5 teams of college football that are in some hot water. Now, I know it's only the first week, or I should say maybe the first week and a half or 2 weeks of college football. Like, there's already been a week 0, and then there's already been week 1. So we just got through the very official first week of college football. Well, unless you want to go back to the week prior to that. But anyways, so it's still early. Obviously, a lot can change over the next few weeks, but I got to be real honest here. There are at least 5 teams that, in my mind, are in some serious jeopardy as far as their seasons are concerned, and some major concerns, to say the least. Now, if you are fans of any of the teams that I mentioned, I do apologize, and I'm sure y'all are very frustrated with the way things have kind of gone, or a little concerned about how well you played and everything. But in the meantime, though, these are the top 5 teams that I just don't see any way that they can turn things around. Now, that's not to say that they won't make the college football playoff, but a lot has to go right for them over the next few weeks. So it's early. It's a week 1 overreaction, but this is my top 5 teams that are in the hot water. And folks, I'm going to go right ahead and get started. So in no particular order, so even though I call this the top 5, this isn't really a top 5 list, but in no particular order, the first team that I'm going to say is in some serious hot water is Clemson. Now, we all know that Dabo Swinney, the head coach of Clemson, has had a reputation as of late for not taking advantage of the transfer portal. And that was made pretty evident when they played Georgia, who was the number one ranked team in the country down in Atlanta. And look, I think we all knew Georgia was going to win that game unless we had a gut feeling that Clemson was going to pull it off. But I don't think we ever thought that it would be the kind of game, the performance that it was. I didn't think it was going to be a 34-3 rout by the Bulldogs. I thought it was going to be somewhere around 27-17, 27-13, depending on how you looked at it as well. But Clemson, at the end of the first half, they actually trailed 6-0. So everyone was thinking, okay, Clemson's hanging in there, this and that. But then the Bulldogs started to turn up the notch. They ended up scoring 28 points in the second half, and they ended up winning 34-3. So clearly, this kind of shows where the landscape of football is. Now, we all know Georgia is still the team to beat in college football, but they have part of the reason why they won that game was because they've actually had a couple of transfers contributing to scoring some of the touchdowns. And this is kind of the way I look at it with the transfer portal. I was a little bit skeptical at first. Like, my concern with the transfer portal at first was, I don't want it to be a situation where it becomes the wild, wild west, where everyone just goes to play for another institution to, play for a chance to win a national championship or get a ring or so, and then go find, if that doesn't work, go find another school, to play for, and this and that. And, it's a very complicated situation, but obviously from what we are seeing with the transfer portal, it's really being beneficial. It's helping out these athletes that are taking advantage of trying to go for what they feel is best for their program. Now, I do question the loyalty aspect of it, because if I were an NFL team and I look at a player and I say, hey, this guy has played, for multiple schools, that would make me question whether he would be committed to playing for my organization and all that. But obviously, college football, this transfer portal is taking full advantage of it. And unfortunately for Clemson, they haven't really done as much. Now, Dabo Swinney, after the game, was asked the question about it. He said, it doesn't matter what I say. People are going to say whatever they want to say. We do what's best for Clemson year in and year out. When you lose like this, they got every right to say whatever they want to say. So whatever you want to say, write about whatever you want. That comes with it. That's just part of it. Obviously, he's kind of aware that all this talk about him not taking advantage of the transfer portal is coming back to hurt his team. And Kirby Smart, after the game, he said it's a forced situation. You have to use it. And he's right, because right now the transfer portal has apparently been becoming very efficient and very useful, and that's just going to be the case. When you look about some of the players, Michael Penix was at Indiana at one point in his career, but then he transfers to Washington, leads him to a national championship appearance. And, that just shows you why. That's just one example that I could really think of as well. But clearly, Clemson, about a decade or so ago, they emerged as one of the top teams. Like, there was a period there where it was going to be Clemson or Alabama as one of the top two teams in the country, whoever's going to win the national championship. But clearly, those days of Clemson have long since passed, and now they're in a situation where they just got humiliated badly. And how are they going to be able to respond to this? I think the only way they can is they have to manage to get themselves. They pretty much have to win almost every single game from here on out to this point. But I just sometimes think that maybe Dabo Swinney's stubbornness could cause a big factor for Clemson. So I do get a little concerned for Clemson as well. And even though it is 12 teams, and it wouldn't surprise me if Clemson does make it back, this is the kind of loss that's going to lose a lot of trust from not only those that are thinking about picking you, but from your own college fan base. And there is some talk down there, at least some rumors that I'm reading about, that Dabo Swinney might be losing a lot of faith in his fan base as well. So ultimately, and just trying to look up this particular tweet here, or this thread page that I've seen hit from The Athletic. The headline, of course, is Dabo Swinney will always have his 2 national titles, of course. Clemson will forever be indebted to him for resurrecting the program. A college football Hall of Fame spot waits for him, but Swinney and the Clemson program have lost their way. And I think if Dabo Swinney wants to resurrect, he's going to have to take advantage of the transfer portal, even if it's not what he truly believes in. So Clemson is definitely a team that's in a hot seat because they clearly have gone far back from the days when they were dominating with quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, just to name a few. So that's my number 5 team. My number 4 team, the number 4 hot seated team, I hate to say this, but Colorado is a team that should be in the hot seat. Now, Colorado did win their game against North Dakota State. Like, everyone kind of knew that North Dakota State was going to be a big threat to Colorado at this point, or at least a threat to knock off Colorado, because the reputation of North Dakota State, they've been one of the most dominant teams that have been one of the most dominant FCS teams. They've also had their fair share of upset wins against Division I powerhouses. And North Dakota State, to their credit, actually made it a game out of this. And North Dakota State actually had a chance to win late, but Colorado was able to hold on. So my thing with Colorado now is, after all the hype that you had from last year, where you got off to a 2-0 start, but only managed to win 2 games for the rest of the way, you're now suddenly, you've kind of been causing a lot of stirs with everything that's being said, whether it's with Coach Deion Sanders or whether it's the fact that you've had your Heisman Trophy, you have guys that are Heisman caliber players, or you're saying, hey, this guy will be at least a top 5 draft pick. When you look at the stats for Sanders, he was 26 of 34. This is the game against North Dakota State. 26 of 34, 445 yards, and 4 touchdowns, obviously. And, Hunter, of course, had 7 catches for 132 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is very impressive. So you could say right now that early in the game, those two are favored to, some of the favorites to win the Heisman Trophy this year. But here's the problem. Colorado's rushing attack did not have a great game. 23 attempts for 59 yards. That's 2.9 yards per carry. You're going to need to have a running game if you want to develop into into a minimum here. Or if you want to develop into one of the top teams at least. The thing, though, is, Colorado, they barely won against North Dakota State. And I get it. North Dakota State was a great opponent. They're a great team. They're always going to be a great challenge. And I think teams that decide they want to challenge North Dakota State have to be very wary, because North Dakota State can win against some great teams, unless, of course, it's against Ohio State, Alabama, or Georgia for that matter. So, but Colorado, they had to overcome a 20-17 deficit at halftime, but still they were able to manage there. But my concern with Colorado is, you talk about being this great team. If you can barely beat North Dakota State, what are you going to do against, the rest of the Big 12? Now, next week you got Nebraska. That should be, it's in Nebraska, but I think that's a game that will be very tough. Coach Matt Rule will definitely have his team set ready to go, but I think that will be interesting. I think it's going to be a good win for Colorado. I also see them beating Colorado State at their place. So I think they'll start 3-0. Then they get into the Big 12 conference. Baylor, at their place, I wish I could say Baylor wins, but I think that's going to be a win for Colorado. But my thing is, there's a lot of pressure that's going to be building on Colorado, because now all of a sudden they're becoming the talk of the Big 12. And when you look at the rest of their schedule, you have Kansas State, you have Arizona, and you have Utah, and also Kansas. Like, surprising, Kansas is number 19, and Oklahoma State too. So they have 5 teams on their schedule that are currently ranked in the top 20. The question is, will Colorado be able to benefit from that? I think if Colorado can somehow win 4 of those games at least, they should be a threat to win the Big 12 championship in some way. But my thing is, with Colorado, you barely won against North Dakota State. There's definitely going to be a lot of eyes that are certainly going to be, there's definitely going to be some eyes that are going to be on you, and you have to step up and play your game for the rest of the way. So I think Colorado is a team that, even though they won their game, they're in the hot seat at this time. My number 3 team in the hot seat, and this is going to hurt me a bit because my sister and her boyfriend actually graduated from this school, but Texas A&M. I watched that game between Texas A&M and Notre Dame, and I was pretty, I was pretty shocked. Like, I thought Texas A&M would put up a fighting chance against Notre Dame, and the game itself was kind of a tightly fought game until near the end there, where Notre Dame took the lead, and then they were able to seal it with a victory. But I thought Texas A&M's defenders were able to hold down Notre Dame's quarterback Riley Leonard. I mean, Leonard went 18 for 30 for 158 yards, which isn't really spectacular, but really it was the running game that ultimately was the big factor for Notre Dame as well. But what happened in that particular moment, or the reason why Texas A&M lost, was the offense just wasn't able to move down, and Connor Weigman, or Wigman, if I pronounce his name wrong, I apologize. He played a big factor into that, and the offense was just not that great. Weigman finished 12 for 30 with 100 yards, but he also had a pair of interceptions. Those interceptions proved to be very costly as well. Texas A&M, 127 yards from scrimmage in the first half, but then they just were able to finish with 246 yards of total offense, but yet 13 points against a talented Notre Dame team, which really Notre Dame struggled early on in that game. They started the game 1 for 8 on third down, and they weren't able to. They had to overcome the loud crowd of Kyle Field as well. And speaking of Kyle Field, I just learned this stat yesterday or so, but Texas A&M has been on ESPN's College Game Day for 10 times now. Guess how many times they've won with an appearance? They've only won one game. So Texas A&M is 1-9 all time. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Well, it's a bad thing when you lose all those games, but I don't know if it's a good idea to maybe go to College Station for some time. I mean, look, it was a big game. Texas A&M against Notre Dame, an opportunity to see a battle of two top 20 teams, but ultimately I think Texas A&M just it just wasn't their time at this well. But I feel like Texas A&M should be in a hot seat, because the biggest concern is the play of the quarterback. If he's going to have performances like that, and I know it's only his first game of the season, but if he's going to continue to play like this, they might have a quarterback controversy down at Texas A&M. So it's something that needs to happen, something that needs to take place in order for the Aggies to turn things around. And I mean, looking at the schedule for Texas A&M, it's pretty favorable over the next couple of weeks. I mean, this week you got McNeese at home. That should be a win. Then you got Florida. Now, Florida is really not off to a tremendous start their season. I mean, they lose to they got killed by Miami. Now, that's a Miami team that should be kept an eye on for during the season. I mean, Florida, they might win against Samford, but then they got Texas A&M. So that should be a very interesting game. And then you have Texas A&M takes on Bowling Green. So I think I see A&M winning the next 3 games, but I do think that Arkansas game might be a little challenging, though I still think it's going to be a win. Where things could go wrong for Texas A&M is against Missouri, I feel. That's a game in October, for that matter. So I think for the most part, A&M will be able to have at least 2 losses before their matchup with LSU, who, even though they lost, and I hate to spoil this, but LSU is on my list of hot teams in the hot water. That's going to be a tough game for Texas A&M, even though they're hosting it, depending on how you look at it. And then, of course, the rest of the schedule sees South Carolina and New Mexico State, 2 teams that I think are wins for A&M, and then Auburn could be a challenge. But then, of course, you have Texas, who currently is ranked number 3 on November 30th as the last game. So that is a game. And I really think that if things go well, A&M and Texas will be a College Game Day. So I don't know if you want to have Texas A&M there, College Game Day there in A&M as well. But I feel like the problem with Texas A&M now is just the fact that the quarterback situation isn't that great at the moment. And if Connor Weigman wants to make some noise and be a threat to win the Heisman Trophy and also have a chance to improve his draft stock, he's going to need to have better games. And McNeese, it could be a great confidence boost for you, but the games against Florida, Arkansas, Missouri, and even the later games against LSU, that's going to be the deciding factor for you to have a chance to improve your draft stock. So Texas A&M, I mean, tough loss, obviously, but they're number 3 because I really felt like they should have had a better performance offensively, and their defense actually did a very good job holding Notre Dame down for the most part, but the offense was just a massive problem. So that's my number 3 team. My number 2 team, I mentioned them a few moments ago, but I had to go there, and I'm sorry to some of my other family members that are fans of this school. LSU. I mean, great game against USC, but man, talk about some bad breaks. I mean, they literally had an opportunity to win it down the stretch, but unfortunately, just it was just shocking. I mean, there is no way that LSU cannot start this game. And Brian Kelly, in my opinion, he is in a hot seat. Let's be realistic here. The last 5 years for LSU, they've started 0-1. They have not won a Week 1 game. And I think this may be a sign that LSU needs to kind of go back to scheduling against teams that, they could easily beat for that matter. But obviously, LSU just was unable to, get themselves going. Where it started for them against USC, they started off really well, putting together a perfect first drive, but they were only able to get, they couldn't get a touchdown out of that. It was an incomplete pass, and because of that, they missed an opportunity to score what would have been some early points for that matter. And then USC, the Tigers were in really good control, but then all of a sudden, they just weren't able to capitalize on some chances. All of a sudden, you get to the second quarter, and that's when USC started to kind of turn things up a notch. And, Kyron Hudson for USC makes a great catch, and then they got in for a 7-0 lead, and then the Trojans just, it was a back and forth kind of a game, and then LSU was able to tie the game up at 10 going into halftime, and then from that point on, just the way that this game played out, it was kind of a back and forth affair. You had USC leading, LSU leading, and then before you know it, it was 20-17 in favor of USC, and the Tigers were in a very good position trying to get themselves the touchdown, but unfortunately they just weren't able to capitalize on the drive and had to settle for a field goal. And that's when the Trojans get a fortunate break over a pass interference penalty, or a targeting penalty, which unfortunately was the deciding factor. The Trojans scored a touchdown later on to win the game 27-20. And, at this point, if you're an LSU fan, you have to think that Brian Kelly is in a hot seat right now, because there is, to start off 0-1 for the third straight season. I mean, the last 2 years you lose to Florida State in dramatic fashion, well, except for the last year's game, but you lose to Florida State twice, and then you lose to USC. Now you start to wonder, okay, what's going to happen here at this stage? And I just think LSU is a team that is in the hot seat, should be their coach, because you cannot go 3 straight years losing a Week 1 game. I know it's only the first week of the season. There's still a chance to, turn things around and have a strong season. But this is not the NFL. In the NFL, you have a better chance of making the playoffs if you were to, start 0-1 and then you win out. But then instead of college football, where if you lose one game, your chances of making the college football playoff, even though it's expanded, is in trouble. Whereas 2 or 3 losses, you're pretty much out. There's no chance for you to turn things around. So I think LSU is a team that is really in a very bad spot for the time being. So I think LSU needs to figure things out. But you look at the schedule this week, they got Nichols, then they're at South Carolina, and then they got UCLA hosting UCLA. Then they have South Alabama. I want to say they go 4-0 in those 4 weeks, but you never know with any of those games for that matter. Their first real test will be against Ole Miss. Ole Miss right now is currently the number 6 seed, or 6 team in the nation for that matter. So it will be interesting to see how the rest of the LSU season plays out. I feel like if the Tigers cannot afford to lose 3 games and make the college football playoff. If you lose 3, in my opinion, I think you're out of the playoff. That will be interesting to see how the rest of the schedule goes. and then how we'll be able to get the 12 teams in for the college football playoff as well. But I feel like LSU is a team that should be in the hot seat, and if they don't succeed this year, if they don't have a great year and make the football playoff, they might need to start thinking about questioning whether Brian Kelly is the answer to that program. So we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. But needless to say, the only reason why LSU is not number one on my list of most hot water teams is because they did not sue their conference over a controversial decision, and they did not lose to a team that they were supposed to beat. As of right now, Florida State is my number one team that's in the hot water. Yes, the Seminoles, Florida State. Folks, I got to be real honest with you. In my personal opinion, I thought Florida State should have been a team that should have made the playoffs last year. But I think one of the reasons why that was the case was the fact that Jordan Travis injured himself in that game, and that kept him out. They ended up having to bring, Alabama in instead of Florida State, the College Football Playoff Committee, which was a decision that I think was very controversial. And so then you had all the stuff about Florida State. Oh, they're suing their conference, and they're really upset, and this and that. And then they go out and they play Georgia, and they get beat pretty badly. Now, Georgia, in their defense, they were upset. They got screwed over in the college football playoff as well. They took their frustrations out on a Florida State team that was also mad, and it was really bad, 63-3. So, and this is, of course, is what led to the conversations of having expanded playoffs, which is what we're getting for this season. So, Florida State, in my mind, had the most to prove. Everyone was saying, okay, Florida State, listen, you sued the ACC, which may be a dumb move for your part for not preventing you from being in a college football playoff. You also, have been talking about how you should have gone in, but the only reason why you weren't was because of the health of your quarterback and everything. Now you have an opportunity to prove yourself. You have a chance to have a great season and show why you deserve to get in there. But sadly, Florida State, they start their season off against Georgia Tech in Ireland, of all places, and it was a very tough game. It was a hard-fought game. Florida State and they were tied at one point, 21-21, but then Georgia Tech wins the game on a field goal. So not a great start to the season, but if you're Florida State, you have to be thinking, okay, we took the loss. It was a tough game against Georgia Tech, but hey, listen, we'll bounce back. We'll bounce back against Boston College. We should be okay. I don't know about that. 28-13, Boston College with a former Houston Texans head coach as their offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien. Yeah, I see you, Bill. He actually helps the Eagles defeat the Florida State Seminoles. And now you have to be thinking, okay, Florida State is in some serious trouble. Florida State started the year as the number 10 team in the nation. And now they're pretty much out of it. They're not ranked anymore. And right now they're sitting at 0-2, and this is a team that's in the most trouble. Because I look at the rest of the schedule, and I see a number of opportunities to get wins, but then the one game that I don't think is going to win, or the two games for that matter, there's two games that I don't see them winning. I don't know if they'll be able to beat Miami, who's currently ranked 12th in the nation, and I don't think they'll be able to beat Notre Dame, who's currently ranked in the top 5. And yet Florida State, all this talking about, hey, we should have been in the playoff. We had an opportunity to be in the playoff, but we didn't. That's like if University of Central Florida, remember when in 2017, Central Florida was undefeated, and yet they proclaimed themselves national champions, even though they didn't get a chance to go to the college football playoff, and Alabama ends up winning the national championship that year. I think you should have had a game between Alabama and Central Florida, so that way those fans, at least from Alabama's side, could just simply shut up after Alabama would have beaten them in the process. But this is like if Central Florida were to have had been doing all this talking, and then they lose the first two games against some real good quality competition. This is basically the opposite of what happened. Florida State starting 0-2, and their head coach Mike Norvell just basically came out in a press conference and said, "I'm sorry, it's not the great start." So, I mean, Florida State, they got some serious, serious problems right now. You're 0-2. Your chances of making the college football playoff are slim. And I feel like at this rate, the only way they're going to get in or have a chance is if they win out every single game. But that's going to be tough because some of the games on the schedule are not very favorable for that matter. But, Florida State, to me, all the talking, all this bragging about, hey, you should have been in. And you might have had an argument as to why you should have been in, but they just didn't quite, they haven't really proven why they deserve to be in a college football playoff. And they're going to need to do more than that for next year, or else it's going to be a long road for all the fans down in Tallahassee. So, yeah, kind of go figure for that matter. So, my top 5 teams, once again, on this list. Clemson at number 5, simply because they got embarrassed by Georgia, and the reason why they need to start using the transfer portal more. Colorado, yeah, they barely won against North Dakota State, but now is an opportunity to really show that they are legitimate threats. And obviously, you can't do that if you have an escape win against a quality opponent. Texas A&M quarterback play was not that great, and they, offense needs to get themselves back on track. It was just not a great offensive game. LSU, again, you're starting 0-1 for the third straight year. Brian Kelly should be in the hot seat. And Florida State, all the talking, and yet you haven't proven anything to show why you deserve to be in a college football playoff last year, or this year for that matter. So, does it necessarily mean that we will see all of these teams not in a college football playoff? No. I think some of them will bounce back and make it to the college football playoff, but we still got a long ways to go. So I just figured I'd give out my top 5 teams that I think are in the hot seat. So with that being said, we're going to step aside real fast, take a little break, but when we come back, I'm going to make my predictions for every NFL Week 1 game. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. It's that time of year where it's the NFL. Yes, it's the NFL season, and we are about ready to start week 1 of this season. And I'm going to be making my predictions for every single game of the week. So without further ado, let's get started. The first game of the season, the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Baltimore Ravens in a rematch of the AFC Championship game. Now, Kansas City will definitely have a big target on them, and rightfully so, because they were looking to become the first team in NFL history to achieve something no team has ever done since the Super Bowl era started, and that's win 3 straight Super Bowls. So Kansas City will be the team to beat, but the Ravens are looking to bounce back after a not-so-good showing in the AFC Championship game. It'll be a very tough game. I think Kansas City might be in for a rude awakening, especially after the last time they hosted a game in which they were celebrating their Super Bowl win. They lost to the Detroit Lions. But I think the Ravens will be a very suitable team. But I just think that Kansas City should be able to take care of business. It'll be a close game. It'll be a hard-fought game. Maybe the best game of this first week. So I'm picking the Kansas City Chiefs barely over the Baltimore Ravens to start things off. Then we have a Friday night game. This is between the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. I talked about the hype around this game, how both teams are going to go down to Brazil and how they're not going to be wearing any green colors, at least, simply because the stadium that they're playing in, it's bad to wear green in that stadium. It's like one of those cases where it's a massive rivalry. Like, it would be like Michigan fans wearing their maize and blue over Ohio State and not being able to survive down there, in a sense. Obviously, it's a different kind of culture down in Brazil. But anyway, you got the Green Bay Packers and you got the Philadelphia Eagles. Jordan Love looking to get the Packers off to a strong start. Green Bay, one of those young teams that really made some noise last season, got to the divisional round and were almost able to knock off the 49ers, but it just didn't work out that way. While Philadelphia looking to bounce back after a disappointing finish to their season in which they lost in a wild card round. So there's definitely going to be some tough adjustments. I think on a neutral field with the way both teams are playing at this point, I think Philly's going to take care of business. I'll give them the win, but if they don't win, then that's going to be a massive problem to start off the season. You got Carolina and New Orleans. The Saints are hosting this game in the Superdome. I think Bryce Young will have a bounce back year because I think the way the Panthers played out their season, there were just a lot of different circumstances, mostly off-field stuff. Coach Frank Wright, who was coach, he gets fired, and the Panthers just were a terrible team. And not only that, they had the worst record in the NFL, but that honor went to the Bears because they traded that pick to acquire Bryce Young. But I think Bryce Young will be able to have a bounce-back game. I don't know if he'll be able to knock off the New Orleans Saints. I think the Saints are one of those teams that should be capable of, being a threat to, possibly win the NFC South. I don't know if that's going to be the case, especially when you got the Falcons and the Buccaneers in a way. I'll pick New Orleans to win this one just because I think the Saints will be able to take advantage of their home field. You got Minnesota and the Giants. Now, the Vikings, definitely going to be a different experience because Sam Darnold's the quarterback now that J.J. McCarthy is out with an injury. They've had some tough offseason stuff. While the New York Giants, home game, I don't know how that's going to play out. I think Minnesota's going to win this one, even with the quarterback play maybe not being as efficient. As long as Justin Jefferson can help Darnold out, I think everything should be fine for Minnesota, despite all the struggles that they've had in the offseason. Then you have the New England Patriots and the Cincinnati Bengals. I really like Cincinnati in this one. Joe Burrow hosting, coming back for his first game back. I think he'll remind everyone that the Bengals should be a team to watch out for in the AFC, and they're threatening the Kansas City Chiefs to say, hey, the rivalry is not over for that matter. So I think the Bengals will win that game against the Patriots. Steelers at the Falcons. This is a very tough one. I mean, you got Russell Wilson going up against Kirk Cousins down there. Russell Wilson with an opportunity to show, that he can bounce back after his tough stint in Denver, while Kirk Cousins looking to have himself the start of a comeback player of the season award. I'm going to go with the Falcons in this one. I just don't know if I can trust, Russell Wilson at this stage of the game. I think Justin Fields gives the Steelers a better chance, but you just don't really know for that matter. Texans and the Colts. This is a game that scares me because I feel like the Texans, are a better team than they were last year, but the Colts have Anthony Richardson. And when those two teams first met, Richardson was torching the Texans on the ground and in the air before, he got hurt for that matter. So it's a tough game as well. And I think this will be the most, highly contested division in all of, one of the most highly contested divisions in all of the NFL. I'm going to go ahead and say the Texans should be able to take care of business. It'll be a close game. I think it's going to be a slim victory for Houston, 27-24, somewhere around that, maybe a little more. But I think Houston should, if they want to win the division, this is a game they need to win first off. The schedule at the start of the season for the Texans is pretty favorable for them, but you don't want to get yourself in a bad hole if you start off, 0-1 for that matter. So I think Houston will be able to take care of business. Buffalo hosting Arizona. I think the Bills are a stronger team, even though they don't have Stephon Diggs anymore. They do have rookie Keon Coleman, who looks to make a big impact and fill in some big shoes, making Josh Allen's life pretty easy. So ultimately, I think Buffalo will take care of business at home. Chicago and Tennessee. That's a game everyone's going to be watching because it's going to be the first game of Caleb Williams. And I was impressed with the way he performed during the preseason. The question, though, is will he be able to do the same thing at this stage, in the first game? I think he'll have some nerves in the first game, but I think the Bears will be able to somehow sneak their way past Tennessee. So I'm taking an upset win for Chicago, even though they're hosting the game against the Titans. Jacksonville is in Miami, and I think that is a game that's going to be another great one. I think Miami will be able to pull through. Tua Tagovailoa should have Miami set up with Tyreek Hill. I don't think Jacksonville will be able to be a pushover, even though the Jaguars have something to prove. They want to win, after having a very dismal season last year in the AFC South. The Jaguars, I think, are still a team to watch out for, but I think it's going to be Miami taking care of business. Then you got Seattle and Denver. I think Denver will be a better team last year now that they've, gotten themselves, out of the Russell Wilson situation. But against Seattle, it'll be tough. I mean, Bo Nix is getting the start for the Denver Broncos, but I look at Seattle playing at home, And yes, there are a few changes. One of those, of course, is the fact that Pete Carroll is no longer talking, the head coach of the Seahawks. So it'll be very tough, I feel like, for the Broncos to get themselves a win. I think it'll be another close game, but if Bo Nix can have himself a great performance, man, that would be huge for Denver, to say the least. And maybe get Bo Nix at the start of a possibility winning Rookie of the Year. The Chargers are hosting the Raiders. Now, this is an AFC West matchup that is going to be very tough. Jim Harbaugh's first game as head coach, and I think he'll have the Chargers ready. Justin Herbert looking to have a bounce-back year. Same thing with the Raiders as well. It should be another great one. I'm going to go with the Chargers just because they're at home, and I think Harbaugh, and they'll be ready and excited for this one. Dallas taking on Cleveland, and this game is in Cleveland, but I'm picking the Cowboys just because they're one of the strongest teams, I feel, in the NFL. Even though the last multiple years it's been, it's your year, but yet you get to the divisional round and you lose, or in some cases you make the wild card and you lose. So I think Dallas will still win this one against Cleveland. Dak Prescott will probably outduel Deshaun Watson. I think Watson will be able to have himself a strong year now that he seems to really be fully healthy and ready to go. But I'm picking Dallas to win that one. Washington taking on Tampa Bay. I think Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers will be able to thrive in their home game as well. Jalen Daniels, getting his first start, should have himself a pretty solid debut, but I just think the Buccaneers are just going to be a little too much. Then you have the rematch of the NFC wildcard showdown between the Los Angeles Rams and the Detroit Lions. And it's in Detroit. And again, this will be a very telltale sign because most people are starting to think that the Detroit Lions are a team that could break through and win their first Super Bowl this year. I mean, one of the dreams matchups that I've seen is that it's the Detroit Lions and the Houston Texans. That would be a dream scenario for fans of the NFL. But I think Detroit will be able to come through and take care of business winning this one. So I think it's going to be the Lions getting the dub over the Rams, but would not be surprised if the combination of Matthew Stafford and Puka for that matter, would be able to get going. Finally, the last game is a Monday night game. It's the New York Jets versus the San Francisco 49ers, and Aaron Rodgers going up against San Fran. But surprisingly, it's against the same guy that tackled me when I tore my ACL last year, he would say. But interestingly enough, Aaron Rodgers going up against Leonard Floyd, who was with the Buffalo Bills when he tackled Aaron Rodgers and unfortunately tore his ACL on the play. Floyd is now a 49er, and it's going to be a really good game. Now, Aaron Rodgers has a 6-3 record all-time against San Francisco, but you look back at some of the previous matchups in the playoffs, it hasn't quite gone according to plan for Rodgers and the 49ers. So that's going to be an interesting sign to watch. But I think the 49ers will be able to get themselves a win. I do think the Jets will have a great, game plan for San Francisco, and it should be a really good one. But ultimately, I just think the 49ers, and this is where it's going to be interesting to watch them. How are they going to react after they lost the Super Bowl last year? Will they be able to succeed, and have a strong season? But because most teams, when you lose a Super Bowl, it's hard to get back there and have a chance to redeem yourself, unless you're Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, for all I care about. Anyway, I think the 49ers get the job done. So that concludes my NFL predictions, and that's going to do it for this edition. A little bit of a shorter episode than most, but folks, I hope you guys have yourselves a really great day. And again, if you want to listen to my podcast, watch it on my YouTube channel on KWC LANE 91, or you can go to Spotify and Podbean to listen to me give my thoughts on all things sports for that matter. So that's going to wrap things up here for this edition. Hope you have yourselves a great week. And hey, let's get this football season going for that matter. So see you guys next time on Krocking, Locking, and Dropping.